Hello, everyone, and for tuning in to NCI Live. My name is David Groth. I'm a technical sales specialist at Network Center, and today we're going to be talking about the cloud. To cloud or not to cloud? That is the question. Joining me today is NCI's own Mike Pagan. Mike is a senior solution architect and Azure product manager here at Network Center, as well as our own resident cloud expert. As always, first a reminder, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or LinkedIn, chat us your questions and we'll do our best to answer them. And on that note, welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. How are you
Sure.
doing?
I'm doing real good, thank you. So in the past, we've discussed the modern workplace, last couple of broadcasts, and with more businesses adopting the hybrid model, and in some cases going completely remote. The cloud is playing a pretty big role for businesses these days. And maybe a good place to start here would be a quick overview of what exactly it means to move to the cloud. What is the cloud? How can we define that?
So there's a lot of technical definitions for this, but for me, the cloud is any place that you store your data that isn't yours. You don't own it. You don't get to touch it. It's somewhere in a warehouse looking building in Northern Ohio or Northern California or Utah or anything like that. So cloud services to me are things like Microsoft 365 or Google Drive or Gmail. Like we've been using these services for a while, and it's cloud because it's decentralized. It's not something you own. It's a rental model. Uh, the one thing that I think a lot of people associate cloud to are servers, information infrastructure as a service, IaaS. So I have servers locally, whether they're virtual machine, VMware, or Hyper-V or anything else. Now I can run those in another cloud provider, Azure, for instance. I'm an Azure, I'm Azure certified, so that's mostly what I know. But it can be GCP or AWS also. But it's any place you can store your data that isn't on your premises or anything that you actually own.
So, what would you say the major benefits are within a business model? What would you say the benefits are to moving a business's data, programs, and so on to the cloud, or adopting some kind of a hybrid model where you have some of that data in the cloud, some of the data within a client's local stuff? What would you say the benefits
So
are?
there's a couple of benefits. Some of it's for the boardroom. So instead of forklifting your existing gear and buying a whole bunch of new equipment, servers and storage and networking and things like that, and updating that, you can go to a subscription model, so to speak. So you can stand up the same services that you have if you want to stay with IaaS types of services, same spin up your same virtual machines in a cloud in Azure, and you pay per month for the resources that you have. So along with that model is the ability to grow and shrink. So if you make a hardware purchase, you're doing your best effort to calculate how things are going to look in 2 years and 3 years, 4 years. If your business takes a downturn and your hardware is going out of warranty, you're putting yourself at risk by not replacing that equipment. If you merger or acquire another company, you need to add a whole bunch of more services in your environment. Then you have to add more services there too. In a cloud, in Azure, you can just spin up more virtual machines. You can make those virtual machines bigger. You can add more space. You can do it very quickly without having to do a long provisioning cycle. The early cloud benefits, things that it'd take 5 weeks to get a server, and it would take 8 weeks to implement it and do those types of things. And I always chuckled because that was never the case, because you could get a server in like 2 weeks, and if you were working on it, you could get it installed in pretty quickly. But the way that the current state of the world is, if we put an order in on a server or some data center equipment, the last set of data center switches I ordered for 6 months before they showed up. So if you're doing a significant upgrade and have a standard for hardware, it may be a long time till you get the equipment,
Right.
much less get to install it. So
And supply chain
so
is a
far,
thing these days.
supply chain is a very big thing at this point, and same things with capacity like bandwidth. So at Azure, you have the benefit of their gigantic telco pipes and redundancy and so forth. If you have um, your own facility, we all know we're in the northern plains here. There's not much trenching happening in January. So if you want some fiber pulled to your building, you're going to have to wait for it to thaw. So there's some things along those lines that are they're big benefits. And then cloud services in general, I keep referencing information as a service, IaaS, virtual machines. Basically, you have a Windows instance installed that you can connect to and do all the standard things to it. But a lot of the future of the cloud is PaaS services, software as a service, and other things. So the future isn't going to require a copy of Linux or a copy of Windows running, and then you manage the services on top of it. It's going to be, I'm going to stand up a Azure SQL instance and I'm going to copy my data to it. So there's no installing SQL and updating it and doing those different types of things. You're just standing up a SQL instance, you're putting your data into it, and away you go. So it's abstracting a lot of that operating system to it too. And that's a big benefit of cloud services also.
So is it fair to say then that you could take and not only be able to put these services up there and separate them, but is it also fair to say that you can scale them to make them like you could put in one server, like we were talking about a little bit ago, and but let's say my business is growing and growing and growing and growing and very quickly. Well, it takes 6 months to get a server, but I need that capacity now. Is it fair to say that you could scale it more rapidly than you could, say, with traditional services?
Yes, absolutely. So same as you can with VMware instance, if you need to add more RAM to it, you shut it down, you add more RAM to it, turn it back on, and away it goes. When you're capped for hardware, then you're capped. Then you're at your limit. But in Azure, they have fixed virtual machine sizes, so you kind of have to conform to this virtual machine has this processors and this much RAM. But as long as you pick something that matches what you want, then turn it off, turn it back on, turn it off, change the size, turn it back on. You have more CPU compute memory resources. You can add multiple disks. You can add bigger disks. You can change.
So literally, you upgraded your server. You just like that.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for those that that currently have a different type of infrastructure, how would you compare this to say a co-location type an arrangement uh, or a data center?
So it's similar. It depends on your perspective of it. As an end user, you're connecting to services and resources, and it's either up or it's down, or it's slow or it's fast, and you go on a bunch of day. But from an administrative standpoint, to me, a co-location facility is you take your existing servers that you own, and you move them to a facility, much like the data center that you have in your office, and then it's run from there because it is more redundant, has faster lines, heating, cooling, all those types of things. You want to decentralize your data center out of your buildings into a central location. But the administrative burden is typically still on you. You still have to update your servers. You still have the servers hardware and the operating system, and make sure things are going. And you're stuck to the capacity that you have. Where something like a private cloud is, they're very similar. It's like I said, it's both the administrative burden. So private cloud would be a company like Network Center owned the servers that you were having your virtual machines provisioned on, and there is some, depending how the agreement is written, the hosting provider, the private cloud, might own the configuration for the virtual machines that exist on the hardware that they own. So your files are yours, but how that server is configured is theirs. So I've seen it a couple of times where a customer wanted to end an agreement in a private cloud, and we were trying to discuss with them about, okay, how can I get access to these virtual machines and migrate them to Azure through a couple different services, and they're like, well, you can't. How these machines are provisioned, it is intermingled with say an Active Directory backplane to all of our other customers. So you can't take these virtual machines as is. You can only copy your data. So the customer had to recreate all their users and copy all their data and reinstall their applications. Where if it was a co-location or a on-prem environment, you can run Azure Site Recovery or any number of migration things and take your existing virtual machine and move it up into Azure and not have to make any changes to it.
So so it'd be in the cases of where they have an on-prem situation, it's actually there's many utilities that can help migrate to a cloud. I do want to pull it back just a little bit and just ask really the question is, are there types and what might be some types of examples where it might not be a good fit to have some type of cloud infrastructure?
Sometimes like regulatory concerns, if you're not willing to work through any regulatory concerns and make those cases that you're at least as secure, if not more secure, in public cloud than you are on-prem, then those types of things always come up. Cost, like if somehow you manage to have a gigantic data center with really big virtual machines that were probably over-provisioned, but you're used to that type of performance, the price for those virtual machines in the public cloud might be more than you're willing to spend, because it's easy to say, well, I'm not paying anything for this. It's just sitting here. And then I have a real cost if I move to a public cloud. Some other situations that I've run into are like engineering firms or multimedia firms. If they need to edit and maintain a library of big video files or big any files, really, CAD drawings or anything like that. Because one of the methods to either go hybrid or to go, fully cloud is to take all of your data, your servers, file server in this instance, and move it into Azure and have a VPN tunnel to it. And the end users will end up using the files like they did before. The problem is now you're copying those files from, a data center across the internet, and that may not be a user experience, a good user experience, because if it's a 800 gig video file that they need to open and make a save changes, do all that kind of stuff, it's not great. Now, engineering firms are kind of surprisingly one of the bigger customers of cloud that I have seen recently, and they're sidestepping the big file problem by using virtual desktops in Azure and then the data lives right next to the virtual machine, so they don't have the issue of files having to copy across the VPN. And then they also get a large benefit from being able to spin up new engineering workstations instead of having to buy them, because they're quite expensive. And in the current climate, even before supply chain issues with the pandemic and other things, you couldn't find a good GPU. If you're gamers out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can't find a RTX 3090 to put in an engineering workstation. They just weren't there. The Bitcoin miners were gobbling them all up, so they can just provision more Azure Virtual Desktops, and away they go.
So I think the big question that we've gotten a lot lately with a lot of information, IT technologies and what have you, is it secure? What are some of the pros with security? Maybe some of the cons with security. What types of security topics surround the idea of the cloud?
So some of it is like the idea that your system is always available across the internet. That is not the case. It is early on in Azure. If you created a virtual machine, by default, it would make a rule that you could RDP into your Windows server or SSH into your Linux host automatically by default if you didn't uncheck the rule when you created your virtual machine. That is a very big problem, because there's a number of RDP and SSH vulnerabilities, if you sit on the internet long enough, you're going to get somebody unwelcome on your system. So now the default when you create a virtual machine, that isn't the case. So
so to be clear, that was the way it was, not the way it is.
yeah, 2 years ago when you create a virtual machine, it would automatically create an RDP rule inbound to every Windows server that you had. So in and of itself, if you did that on-prem, you'd have the same issue. So other things, so Azure, all of the disks are encrypted. So your data is encrypted at rest. It's in an incredibly secure physical location. You don't have to worry about somebody smashing your window and stealing your server. That luckily I've only seen a couple of times in my career, but that kind of thing does happen. There's a backup infrastructure as a part of the whole system, so it's the same as what you have available on-prem. And in general, you have the eyes of Microsoft's security team watching all in and outbound connections on their private. They own giant swaths of the internet, so they're watching all this type of traffic come in. And if they see something incredibly bad, then they can warn people accordingly. So some of it is, to me, lack of security in cloud services. Azure is misconfiguration. Not paying attention to those types of things, but there's a lot of other things built into Azure by default. There's a Azure Security Center that will warn you, like, hey, you have some things that aren't configured to best practice. You should do this, or you should do these types of things. By default, it wants you to multi-factor authenticate your owner. There's multiple roles you can put on there. So if you have multiple people that want to get connected to these systems or be able to limit what they do, there's role-based security that you can say they can start the virtual machine or they can turn it off, but they can't delete it, things like that. So it's very secure from that standpoint. And then they're always adding different layers. Azure Sentinel is a service that it's a SIM, Microsoft SIM, that you can pump logs into it for review. And it's a subscription model, so in and of itself, it is less expensive than buying a SIM tool. So,
sure. So, is it fair to say also, if memory serves, you can, even if you say you've got all of those Microsoft tools at your disposal, but in addition, if you say have a standard within your organization, you can also add in third-party security tools, say a firewall or whatever within the networking infrastructure that Azure has. Is that correct?
So there's many virtual firewall vendors, security appliances that you can create. So if you wanted to create a virtual Meraki or a virtual ASA or a virtual Sophos firewall, there's steps to go through the marketplace and stand one up. And then you can route all of your traffic through that device. You can also route all of your traffic back through your network for logging purposes. So the devices themselves would not be able to get to the internet through Azure. They would have to go through your VPN tunnel and get connected, hook through your existing services on-prem. So there's other security services, appliances. There's a whole marketplace of things that you find your service or you find your appliance that you want to create. Next, finish, swipe your credit card, joke. But and then it's up and running, and then you can start configuring it.
Yeah. So I do want to pause here real briefly and just remind everyone that's watching to please put any questions that you have in the chat window so that we can answer them. If you do have them, please don't be shy. Mike is available here to answer any questions you might have. So moving on, the big question I think other people are asking or thinking of right now, may not be asking, is cost wise, is it cheaper to move to the cloud, stay on prem? How does the costing work? And I mean, obviously we can't get into dollars and cents and individuals because that we all know that every network is different, but comparatively in a general sense, what are your thoughts on that?
I think if you're going to, it depends on how you do the math. It always comes to the math, right? And I'm a consultant, so it always depends. But if you're the type of business or work for a type of business that buys a servers, and then runs them for 5-6 years, and that's the only input in the equation. I paid X for the server, I paid X for my VMware and my Microsoft licensing. I don't do any upgrades. Then cost models against those things for Azure get very difficult. If you are the type of organization that is more proactive about your hardware purchases and maintenance and understanding the true cost of keeping a system up and running, then I think it definitely can be on par with it, if not cheaper, depending on what you actually need to run. Because there's benefits in Azure if you have a server that you don't use incredibly often. You can turn it off, and then you don't pay for the compute costs of it. You still pay for the disk and to back it up, but you don't pay for it to be running. So on top of that, there's reserved instances, and Microsoft used to be called CSP licensing. So basically, it's committing to run a virtual machine in Azure of a certain type for a year or 3 years. And then same with the Windows license. And generally, you can save between 25 and 40% of a cost of a virtual machine for the compute and the Microsoft licensing and any services that are on it, like SQL, if you're willing to commit for a year or 3 years in those cases. So, and one benefit of using Azure that you kind of have to pay attention to, and I don't even account for things like power and cooling and data center facilities and that kind of stuff, but it's there in California or highly popular New York. It's going to definitely be an actual cost.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Up here, it's not so bad. But the platform itself is ever changing, ever updating and evolving. And a lot of times I've seen it where the virtual machine generations will upgrade, and it's the same cost as the old ones. So
Yep.
by turning it back on, and you have the same from before, and the platform is updating and it's getting more secure in the back end, and there's no more firmware updates for your equipment. There's no more platform updates for like VMware, things like that.
So in my mind, what I'm hearing too is that you were talking budget wise about, okay, you buy the server, you buy the Windows license. I'm assuming Windows, but just say Windows licensing, and then you plug it in, turn it on. But we don't just plug in and turn on servers. We actually run things on them, right? We run programs and applications, and we do various things with those servers, right? So is it possible to like take those and save money by taking those applications? Like, I'm going to use an example like SQL Server or file shares or storage, things like that. Take them off of those servers and completely get rid of the server. I mean, is that something that's possible? Or say some kind of a web service or something? Can we take those off of there and move those to Azure without actually using a server? Is that possible?
Yes. Yep. There's a lot of different platform services. Azure SQL is one of them that you can stand up, and it abstracts all of the operating system and all the rest of it. I mean, they may actually be running on containers, but nobody really knows. So it's basically you spin it up and then you fire up your Microsoft SQL. I can't think of it. The SQL admin tool. Connect to it, and you can upload your database and go to work. And then you have the ability to do anything that you want to it from that standpoint. You just don't have access to the operating system. You can now make Azure files, take an Azure storage account of a amount of file share and connect them to Windows. So there's capabilities to do things like that. You can actually make a NetApp NAS up in Azure too for those types of things. So that is definitely evolving from those standpoints. Web services for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Cloud in general is a developer's toy box because there's containers and app services and a ton of different things up there for those types of things. A lot of it comes down to support. So if you have an application that you want to do something with, obviously try to either on your own try to figure it out, or if they say nope, we know it works, you can do these things with it, then those are absolutely things you can do.
We do have a we do have a question. One question here. What are some good for those of us, that are out here that are really just getting started and need some really they need learning resources. They want to learn all about it. They want to learn Azure, the cloud. Can you recommend any learning resources for learning about it?
Yeah, Microsoft's documents, as boring as that sounds, is read the documents, are really quite good. They've made a strong commitment to making their documentation very strong and with examples and code examples in it. So you can definitely see 3 different ways to spin up a virtual machine through the portal, through Azure CLI, and through PowerShell. So, those types of things are really cool. Microsoft has created a resource called Microsoft Learn. So I think it's microsoft.com/learn. And you kind of pick what you want to learn, IaaS, for example, or a certification track. And there's little learning paths. So you can get like a module that's 10 minutes. There's like 5 minutes of reading, and there might be a spin up a virtual machine, and they'll spin you up a learning Azure environment in some cases to spin up a thing so you can make changes to it. And then the sandbox goes away in a couple of minutes. Those 2 things from first party stuff are really good. I've used a lot of Pluralsight videos.
Yeah.
They have a ton of training, and then the people that make that content also have like YouTube channels. So Tim Warner, Mike Pfeiffer, there's another couple that I follow pretty religiously that have like bite-sized contents. They're professional trainers. They put content out. Here's the 10 things that changed in Azure this week, because it's usually at least 10 things that have changed through the portal.
I remember seeing those. Those are insanely, because the 10 things that change. A lot of the Microsoft stuff has 10 things that change in a week. I talked about the modern workforce ones, literally 10 things, and there's probably more. I will say, I'll give a shameless plug. We have our annual conference, Envision, and at Envision we do some Azure track. We do some Azure presentations, and we'll actually have a link to the Envision presentations for Azure that Mike has done. So you'll be able to learn and go through a lot of those, both on our YouTube channel as well as we'll have some on our website. So I do want to kind of, Mike, we've talked a lot about this. Is there anything you'd like to say, kind of in summary, to give a broad overview and talk about anything you'd like to say in kind of closing?
Mostly that, the cloud, whichever platform you want to try out, there's plenty of resources available to take a look at it, to test and to try things out. Azure has a 1-month free trial. You can use $200 worth of services to stand it up. So if you wanted to use your personal email account and set up a trial and go out there and make a virtual machine and see what it looks like and see what the networking looks like, definitely try that out. Most organizations, I think, are going to be in hybrid mode. They're going to have some set of things on site, and they'll be extending into the cloud, so a VPN connection up to Azure virtual machines, so to speak. And as they get familiar with it, you move that more that way, or the servers just kind of evaporate, and it's all truly modern work kind of things. SharePoint, file shares on servers that don't exist because you don't have to maintain them. So try to get tinker around with it. Try to get familiar with it, because I'm an old school server hugger. I mean, I've been installing servers since Compaq was a brand. So
same.
I was much of a server guy as anything, but the cloud is just there's so much potential. There's so much opportunity to do good things for the business from a technology standpoint to help you grow. and use your money wisely, that I encourage everybody to actually take a look at it, try it out, talk to other people that have done it. You know, we have some. I've done some sessions at InVision. Watch YouTube. If you need any help, hit us up. We can definitely kind of show you what other people are doing. Talk to other customers and see what they're doing. Customers, talk to your people you know, business people, people in your industry. See what they're doing, or see how they're doing it. Steal their good ideas and take them as your own. Nobody has to know. It's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest message is look at it, try to adapt a cloud strategy. You know, look for it and see if a cloud strategy is good for your business. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I wanted to thank you for being with us today and partaking with some of your knowledge. I wish we could talk a lot more, but we try to keep these things fairly short. So, everyone, as always, thanks for joining us. Please make sure to visit our website at netcenter.net. Email us if you have any questions at info@netcenter.net or reach out on any of our social channels. But please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube or LinkedIn channels so you can be notified of any of these upcoming videos. So, as always, I'm David. Thank you for tuning in to NCI Live.